Amen. Thank you, Brian, for doing that in the spur of the moment. I've asked Evan Ward, who's on the Curriculum Council and represents history, to introduce Sarah, and then Sarah will share with us, and after that, if we have time for questions, we'll go with those questions. So Evan, thank you.
All right, it's a privilege to be with you all this afternoon, particularly to hear Sarah share her skill with us in various areas, including digital history. Sarah is one of the most beloved and skilled instructors in the Department of History. She's snickering, but it's true. I watch those classes fill up very quickly each semester, particularly in the pedagogy classes, the methodology classes that she regularly teaches. Sarah received her bachelor's and master's in history at BYU and her PhD from the University of Toronto in 2013. She joined the faculty where she's been successful, receiving a college award for teaching, as well as the Frank Fox Award for Teaching Excellence in the Department of History. I've been most impressed with her scholarship. Still remember her job talk in her project that she's working on right now, her book, CNE's Hospitals Within and Beyond City Walls, Charity and the Ospedali di Santa Maria della Scala, 1400 to 1600, and the skill that she employs in using GIS and digital tools is really quite impressive. She's published on the digital humanities and is just a delightful colleague to have. And I will turn the time over to Sarah right now.
Thank you, Evan. That's a very kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here and to get to share a few thoughts with you today. And let me actually share my screen. And I really hope that this can be sort of more of a discussion. I'm hoping to leave lots of time at the end for questions and discussion, because I know that all of you have lots to say and a lot of experience in this area as well. I decided to call this talk Innovation in the Classroom as a Joint Venture, because when I was thinking about what to present on and what my digital history course represents, I thought I can't talk about this without the students. The students are a large part of the success of this class and what has made the class such an innovative and fun learning experience. And so that's really why I wanted to think about innovation in the classroom as a joint venture. So what do we do and what do our students do to make innovation happen? I think a lot of us probably hear the word innovation and maybe kind of roll our eyes or cringe a little bit. It's kind of in some ways become a buzzword and it's losing its meaning, right? The more we talk about innovation and things that are innovative, and it seems to be sort of the thing that everybody's looking for these days. What's the next big innovation? Which is a shame because it means that the word has come to have some associations, right? It's something that's flashy, it's something that's shiny and new. And I don't think that's necessarily what innovation has to be. As a medievalist, I sort of naturally and annoyingly gravitate towards looking at the Latin roots of words. And there are two phrases, or well, a verb and then a noun phrase that the word innovation derives from. The verb novo novare, which means to make something new, but it can also mean to renew or to alter something. And then the phrase res novae, a new thing. I like looking at innovation more as something that we can create, and whether it be something entirely new or something that we have just renewed or altered. I think innovation challenges our creativity, and specifically as part of learning and teaching, it helps us and our students to synthesize information, helps us find different and new questions to ask, and brings meaning to the educational experience. I think this is what creates those moments that students hang on to and remember, even if they forget half the content that we teach them, right? They remember something that stood out to them as innovative, something creative that they were able to participate in. I was also thinking while I was preparing for this talk about this subject specifically at BYU, right? What does innovation mean in learning at BYU? And one of the things that I reread as I've been thinking about this was President Worthen's university conference talk from actually my first year on the faculty. I was a brand new faculty member in August of 2016. And this is when he introduced inspiring learning, right, as a term, as something that is one of our aims and goals as faculty at BYU. I realized as I read the talk that the title of this talk is just a really long-winded way of saying inspiring learning. He defines it as actions that motivate and inspire students to learn, and learning that leads to inspiration or revelation. And I think those are both part of innovation, right? Those are innovations. He talked about how inspiring learning requires faith from both students and faculty as we join together in this process of education. And he really encouraged us to expand the number of students who have these opportunities, right? He wanted us to be more purposeful and intentional in designing learning experiences for students and in developing stronger relationships with our students, which is something that Erin Holmes talked about in our last teaching lunch so beautifully. So these ideas that he introduced first in 2016 are also part of the strategic plan. And specifically among those objectives, there are two that I think relate really well. One is to pursue the Inspiring Learning Initiative, and then also advance student-centered research and scholarship. All of this dovetails, of course, with experiential learning. And I think we often view experiential learning as activities outside the classroom. So we talk a lot about internships and study abroad, teaching assistantships, field work, and all of those are really crucial and essential and important to these goals and to what we want students to be doing. But I think sometimes we forget that we can also have experiential learning happen in the classroom. It doesn't just have to be outside of the classroom. We can create those experiences in our courses, maybe not every day of the week that we meet, but hopefully often, right? So who bears the responsibility then for innovation? Well, obviously, from the title of the talk, I'm suggesting that it's both us as instructors and our students. But there are specific things that we do, right, as instructors. We create the courses that we teach. So we decide what material and content we're going to use. We decide the schedule and the organization of the course, assignments and assessments, and the method of delivery. So in that sense, it's really up to us, right? If we want to have an environment that's innovative and we want to foster innovation, to think about these different areas of our responsibility and to think about how we can incorporate opportunities into all of these different things that we design and we do. One of the things that I think, and maybe I need to shrink this down for a second here because this slide is big, is that innovation occurs most successfully as we put our effort into those areas that are our responsibility, right? And join with our students, we can create innovation. We provide knowledge base and skill development and hopefully an environment where students feel comfortable exploring. And then on their side, right, students provide ideas. They're creative, they're curious, their willingness to learn, to apply, and to practice what we teach. I think all of these things, at least these are the things that I think of as coming together to create innovation. So the example that I want to give you today is from my digital history class. Digital history is a field that has actually been around a lot longer than most people assume, but it's really sort of come into its own along with other digital humanities in the past couple of decades. This class is really kind of a big experiment in innovation. It is a class that had never been taught in our department before, so I was a little nervous about that and whether we'd find student interest in this. And it's a field that not a lot of students know about. In fact, I have students often sign up for this class thinking that they're going to be learning about the history of digital technology, which is not what the class is about. Instead, the class is designed to introduce them to the field and the practice of using digital tools and methods to investigate, explore, and then represent and convey understanding of the past. So it's an introductory course. It's a 200 level course. The idea is to introduce students to the field, to give them some grounding in some of the key challenges and debates in the field so that they understand what it is that they're engaging in. And then also to teach them some tools and techniques that historians use in doing digital history. So I teach them a variety of tools, tools for text analysis and annotation, tools for image analysis and annotation, how to build a clean, structured database. I teach them about digital mapping and digital tools for creating timelines. And then in conjunction with those tools, I also talk to them about related issues like open access and copyright, public history. So they kind of get to explore those things along with learning these tools. I can't cover everything in the course, obviously, and there are some really important digital tools that I just don't include, like 3D modeling and network analysis, because those things would take an entire course on their own to explore. But my hope is that by introducing students and kind of giving them a sampling of these digital tools, that will pique their curiosity and they can then find the courses in other departments that they can take to learn those kinds of skills if they have the interest. And it would be kind of a dream of mine to be able to have more digital history courses. There's a few other fellow colleagues in my department who are doing digital work, and it would be great if we could develop some of that down the line. One of the things I do in the course that really pushes students out of their comfort zone is I have them work in groups. And I know that some of you are probably thinking, my students work in groups all the time, but history majors are very accustomed to solo work. They work in isolation. They're not used to having to do group work. And I get so many nerves from students during the first day of class when I tell them they're going to be working in groups. I can just see the panic on their faces. But that challenge, I think, helps foster innovation, right? Because it pushes them outside of their comfort zone. And I help explain to them, right, that part of the reason I'm having them do this is that digital history is inherently a collaborative field. Scholars work with tech people. They work with experts in various areas to create digital projects, and most digital projects are collaborative. And so I want the students to have that experience. I also have them create group contracts. And so I try to do a few things to allay those fears. But this is, I think, sort of the first thing I do in the course that helps create an innovative environment. The other thing I do is, rather than giving them specific sources or specific historical topics that they have to study, I allow the groups to choose what they want to focus on. There's some risk involved here in this. And I do actually have to spend quite a bit of time giving them guidance on how to narrow their ideas, how to, focus the scope of the questions they're asking, how to find appropriate primary sources. So I have a lot of consultations as part of the course, but I found that they do a lot better with topics that they are interested in, that they want to study, right? So this is why I allow them to have a little bit of freedom in their choice. As they're introduced to various digital tools, they create group assignments, group projects based on their chosen topic. And I kind of scaffold the assignments in the course so that by the end of the last digital tool they learn, they have sort of a little catalog of digital projects, small digital projects they've completed, that they can then take and work on expanding for a final project. So most often students will choose one or two of the projects that they've already completed for a smaller assignment, and then expand those into a larger project for the final assignment of the course. So I want to show you what a couple of these final projects look like. The first one we'll take a look at here is a project that was completed this past fall. It's a timeline by Olivia Gajan, Darian Kempter, and Michael Pulsifer. It's actually a set of 2 timelines. And I'm going to escape out here so I can show you these. And I'll actually put the links for these in the chat. So if you want to go to these timelines and look at them yourself while I talk about them, you can do that. So this group, there we go. This group was interested, maybe unsurprisingly, in pandemics and the history of pandemics. Living through one themselves, they thought about what students might have experienced in previous pandemics, and so they decided to study the early 1900s flu pandemic, and specifically they wanted to look at the student experience at BYU. So they started doing some research. I connected them with Corey Neimer in Special Collections, who's the university archivist, and he helped direct them to some really great primary source material that they could use. And one of the things that they found was the yearbook for 1918, 1919. And in that yearbook, the editors had actually created a timeline for the yearbook that expressed the history of the pandemic during that school year. So for one of their projects, this group of students turned that analog timeline in the yearbook into a digital timeline that you can explore, that you can scroll through. You can click the links here and they will take you to those actual primary sources as they're housed at the library's website, so that you can read and explore. One of my favorite details in this particular article is that it talks about how everybody has to leave school and there's not a whole lot of jobs, so they're all going to work at cherry picking or beet digging, and it gives some really good insight, right, into what the experience was like for these students in the early 1900s as school closed. So they were really thoughtful as they recreated this timeline from the yearbook, thinking about images that they could use and other information that they could include to make this educational as viewers would interact with it. One of the other things I was particularly impressed with is the way that they incorporated some of the wider context, right? They noticed that the students highlighted things like the signing of the armistice. And so they made sure that they included those things in the timeline. They wanted to reflect, right, the entire experience. It wasn't just about the epidemic. It was also about some of these bigger world issues that were happening. So they created this timeline. And actually, let me show you my favorite slide. There's some great pictures of students in masks. I love this cartoon, essentially, that talks about mask fashion. It's from the campus newspaper, The White and Blue, from January 10th, 1919, sort of making jokes about the different styles of masks, right? So they really found a lot of good material to help them understand what students at BYU would have experienced during that time. And they point out in the paper that accompanies this project, because I do make them write a paper that explains the project, its historical value, how they went about the project, and kind of reflect on what they hope the project conveys. They point out the hope and the humor and the kind of uncertainty that they were able to see in the experience of these students. And then they compare that to their own experience by creating a parallel timeline for the current COVID-19 pandemic. So they sort of took the model that these early 1900s students used and created, and then applied that to the 2020 experience. And so you can scroll through here and see how they include, again, both events specific to BYU and then some larger world events. And it was really fascinating to me to see the things that they felt were really important to mention and include. So they include, right, George Floyd and the race riots that occurred. They mention later in the timeline the presidential election, right? That in the midst of all of this, there's a presidential election happening too. They highlight the sort of controversy over the return to school in the fall. And this was just such a great project that these students were able, really with their own creativity, right? I gave them a little bit of direction. I taught them how to use these tools, but this was their innovation to create these projects. So that's one example of the kind of project that these students produce in this class. Another example that I'll show you is a map. And again, I can post the link to this in the chat so that you can look at it if you would like to. Oop. There we go. So this group, as you can see from the title of the map here, this was a group made up of Madeline Lennon, Karen Moss, and Ty Stevens. And they did some fantastic work here. They were interested in female criminals, and they wanted to know, turn of the century, 1900, what kind of crimes were females being convicted of or accused of. And so that was their kind of original big, broad question. And they eventually narrowed in on Chicago, right? They realized, okay, we need to pick a specific place to investigate this. It's going to be too much to try and cover the whole US. And we need to pick a specific time period. So they zeroed in on the 1900 to 1930. And they found an amazing collection of digitized sources that Northwestern University has. It's called the Chicago Homicide Database. And they went through that database and were able to pull out for these years examples of women who were either tried for or convicted of murder. But that was just murder. So in order to find information about other crimes, they found tons of different sources to help them learn about what women were doing besides murder. So they looked at newspapers, they looked at police reports, they looked at the Chicago Tribune in particular was a good source for them. So they were really willing, this group did a lot of research. They were really willing to get into the weeds here. And it was complicated, right, by the fact that they were really reliant on digitized material. There were a few things here at our library that they could use, but because they couldn't travel to Chicago, right, and go see these items and dig around in archives there, they had to rely on digitized material. And so they became really, really expert at using some of the databases that other libraries and archives have created. So they created this map that shows different decades, the crimes that women in particular neighborhoods of Chicago were either accused of or convicted of. They were really ambitious, and I said, you know, it's okay to narrow it down. So they stuck with only 45 cases, which was a lot to do, to look at even in one semester. And for each of these layers on the map, there is an underlying table full of data about the women that they're highlighting here. So they created this map that you can explore. You can click on the points and it will give you some information about the woman, what she was accused of doing, and if there's an image or a citation to where they got the source of this information, they included that as well. And they found some really interesting things. One thing that they didn't expect was the number of women who would be arrested for murder, but murder because they participated in usually performing abortions. That was a really fascinating find for these students and for me as well. They also, you know, they were thinking, oh, early 1900s Chicago, there's going to be a lot of like gang-related, mob-related crime, but they found that there really were only a few women who were charged as brothel operators, a couple women who get in trouble for bootlegging and moonshine, but crimes like insurance fraud and robbery and murder were far more common. One of the things I really liked about this project was that they used this research to open up a ton of questions for further research. And this was one of the things they did really well in the paper that accompanied this project, was kind of explain, you know, now that we have seen and mapped this many cases, we want to do more, because then we could try to look for some patterns, right? They were interested in geographical location. Why are crimes happening at certain times in certain neighborhoods? They started to think about the different immigrant neighborhoods in Chicago and what kinds of crimes are more prevalent there, and why is that the case? And so they were really able to see how taking data and putting it in a digital map could create a bunch of opportunities for really interesting questions and research. And it has made me think that I would love if the course was actually a year-long course, so that students could actually continue through and follow some of those leads that they find. Okay, one last project that I wanted to show, and I will again post the link to this. This is it's a combo project. It's both mapping and timeline based. And it was done actually in the fall of 2018 by Katrina Goodwin, Kimberly Brown, and Leslie K. Thomas. This is a project that looks at the settling of the Ohio River Valley. So these students were interested initially in early American migrations, and they eventually said, okay, we need to focus on a specific migration and maybe a specific place. So they settled on Marietta, Ohio, which is one of the earliest, I think it might be the earliest settlement, permanent settlement of Europeans in the Ohio River Valley. And they created this story map. So they took historical maps and geo-referenced them to overlay on a modern map so that you could explore this area. So one of the things I realized as I was preparing for this presentation is that these maps that they geo-referenced were no longer working on this project. And it's because the student whose account housed the files graduated and her account was closed. So I've been working with the geospatial lab to get this fixed. So let me show you, this is what one of those geo-referenced maps looked like. This is a map titled Land West of Pennsylvania. It's from 1785. And they overlaid it so that you can actually zoom in. You can look at the details on the map. They were able to obtain really high resolution images of these maps, which is fantastic, so that you can really explore them. And you can see how the surveyors for the Ohio Company are dividing the land into parcels, right? And some of the resources that they're identifying in the area. They also found some maps that identified previous Native American settlements in the area, and they geo-referenced those. They wanted to include both the perspective of the white settlers and the Native Americans who lived in this area. And then to accompany the sort of spatial exploration of the settlement, they also created a timeline that goes through and details the settling of the Ohio. And they include numerous primary sources here. They were really thorough in finding government documents, letters, all kinds of things that helped them to sort of lay out the history of this settlement. This project also includes a whole list of references. And this was something that I was really happy that they added to their project. So things that are referenced in the maps and in the timeline, they created links for further research, links to those primary sources, links to some of the images that they annotated as part of their image annotation project. So you can follow these links and find images that they've annotated to include more information to explain what's happening in the image. And this project was just really kind of above and beyond the expectations I set for the project itself. So, let me see here. Maybe one of these links, maybe this one will work. There we go. This is one of the maps that they were able to georeference. And fingers crossed the geospatial lab and I can get this project back running. So this is one of the maps that shows the Hopewell mounds in the settlement that these pioneers then came in and built their own settlement on top of. So again, I hope by showing these examples, I've really highlighted how I give the students the tools that they use to create these projects, but the innovation really comes from them. They are amazing, and I've found that by giving them that freedom to pick what they want to research and to kind of, in some cases, run a little wild before I have to rein it back in. We've been able to see come out of this class some really stellar work. And I've been most happy when I get emails from these students and they tell me that they have been able to use these skills in their jobs, in their graduate work. Leslie K. Thomas, for example, has done some mapping work in an internship that she had. And I have a group of students who took this class who are now taking a public history class together because it drove their interest in these types of things. So I really think the main thing I want to convey here is to not be afraid of the risks that these kinds of classes and projects pose. Innovations don't always work. And I'm sure each of us have had those experiences in our courses, right? We have an assignment that we designed that we think this is going to be brilliant and amazing, and then students just don't understand it or they really have trouble with it. But that process of failing can be the source of really great learning. And I've seen that with student projects in this class as well. They have an idea and they find that there aren't the sources that they need to explore that. So they have to shift course, right? And I've had students tell me that they learned so much from having that experience of just spending hours doing the research and not finding sources, but in that process, they learned how to research, right? So I think the risks of innovation are worth it, both for us and for our students. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about what I've shared. And I would also love to hear from you if you want to share some of the own things that you've done in your classes, or any thoughts you have on innovation as a joint venture with us and students. So maybe I'll stop sharing my screen here so we can go back to looking at each other, and I'll turn the time back over to Sam.
Thank you very much. Wow, Sarah, I should have been more aware of what you're doing there, and we have to talk, because this is one thing great about these master teaching lunches. You find people teaching things that in ways that you relate to, and the work I do in historical geography goes right along with what you're doing there. So as you've shared with us a great way to innovate with students, I want to open this up to comments and questions from all of us in what you're doing. Ben, got a question?
Sarah, I had a question. Because they're doing individual projects, you don't have a common reading list per se on the historical context. I suppose you have a common reading list on the technical part of it. Do they,
Yeah.
so if you could say more about that, but also secondarily, like that Ohio company group, did they like read secondary sources, or they like reading McCullough and the Pioneers or something like that? And as part of this, or are they only going for primary sources based on what the content that they picked?
Right. That's a really good question. So there is a shared reading list of sort of the digital side. So helping them learn about the field of digital history, debates in the field, kind of grounding them in the methodology. There's shared reading about the tools that I have them do. But as far as their individual projects, you're right, they're reading resources completely separate from one another. So at our consultations, I check in with them about the primary sources that they've been finding, the secondary sources that they're reading. And with their final projects, they do have to submit bibliographies that show, right, what kind of both primary and secondary source reading and research they're doing. So it's a big task for them to undertake, but when they do it, it produces really just stellar results.
That's great. Darren, you want to add a question there?
Yeah, Sarah, we've talked about this just briefly before, but I
Yeah.
thought maybe it would be useful for others to think about this. One of the challenges I've had when trying to incorporate just a little unit of this kind of in my course is this is all new to the students. It's completely new skill sets. They have no experience with any of these tools. And so I've always struggled with how to fairly assess this sort of thing. How much of this is pass fail? How much of it is just kind of a gut check at the end? Did they put work into it? How do you determine, what kind of rubrics you use, or just how does the grading all come together for these sorts of projects?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this, and it is a big challenge. It's also kind of reflects the bigger challenge for the field, right? That scholars themselves are struggling to, and universities struggle to assess digital scholarship, right? Like, how do we know how to assess a book, but how do we assess a digital project? So one of the things I've done is I make sure that every assignment has really clear expectations and requirements so that the students know exactly what features the assignment needs to include. So they know they're being assessed on that. And then they also know that with every assignment, I'm also looking at their historical thinking. So how is this assignment showing historical analysis or thought? And I haven't come up with a good rubric that I use because each assignment is so different. They're using different tools, and so there are different requirements. And there are assignments like the database creation assignment. That's the one assignment I do provide them data, and I say, okay, here's the data you're going to use, and you're going to practice making a clean database with this data. Because if I just left that on their own, that assignment would, I think, be a disaster. So yeah, I've had to go through each assignment really carefully and just kind of assignment by assignment. And then I assess them right on how well they use the tool, if they demonstrate that they've learned how to use it, right? So they know that there are those kinds of specific things that they're being evaluated on. But yeah, it's not been easy, and I haven't found a solution yet for like a specific rubric that I can use. And one of the reasons I leave out some of the tools like network analysis is what you said, Darren, just that students are, a lot of times this is all entirely new to them, and some of those more complicated, right? It would take like a month at least to get them comfortable enough to be able to do some of that stuff. So I tried also to be strategic about like which tools they would be able to learn and use within a semester, and use effectively. And like the GIS stuff, my hope is that it will give them enough of a taste that they'll want to go take geography courses and they'll want to learn. And I have had a couple of students go take some courses in the geography department because they were really interested in the mapping. So
Yeah.
I'll keep trying to send them your way.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up question, to kind of comment there. One thing I found is if you want to do one of these things in your class, maybe not as a whole class, but as units, it's experimental. You don't know how it's going to work on, the first time you do it, just be real upfront with the students that this is an experiment, and
Yeah.
you're going to be easy on the grading and let them explore it together with you. And eventually it'll all work out, and you'll figure out some assessment strategies. But the first time, I don't think it's important to worry about it, provided it's within the framework of other things you're doing in the course that you can assess them on. Well, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The first semester I taught this course, that I talked about that with them and said, this is the first time this has ever been done, so we're all in this together.
Jim, do you have a question?
Yeah. Although it was better formulated a few minutes ago, about 2 minutes ago, than it is right now. But I'm interested in something you said about failure being part of the learning process. And I think important to it. It's something I've kind of concluded in my own teaching, especially anything experiential. But I wonder how you reconcile that with the assessment, because in my experience, trying to assess students on these projects makes them really risk averse and unwilling to try anything that they aren't specifically directed to do. And then, and to me, it seems more important to get them to just play with the tools, even, just experiment and learn that way. And so I don't know, how do you have any, that's not really a question, but I just wanted to get any response to that.
So yeah, one of the ways I encourage them to feel okay with maybe not succeeding, or being able to accomplish exactly what they were hoping to accomplish is, every group project that they do is accompanied by a paper. The smaller projects, the paper is short. It's just like 3 to 4 pages that they write as a group. And part of that paper is always reflecting on the process that they went through. So they get to explain, and I tell them that this is a space where you can say, like, we tried to find these sources, but they weren't there. So we ended up having to use this instead. Or actually the group that created the pandemic timelines, they had a really funny mapping project. They in their paper, they just said, we hated this tool. We had such a hard time with it. It was so hard to understand. And so I make that reflection on their experience part of the assignment. And that, I think, helps them to feel like I really want to hear from them about their experience with the tools and how so it's not just that they're being graded on how they use the tool, but they can actually also share with me how it went, right? And what they felt like they were able to do, and where they felt like they struggled. But yeah, it's really hard to incorporate failure into assessment. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts about that. I'd love to hear them.
Self-assessment is the only thing I've found that works, but I also don't feel like I can grade that. So
Right.
I actually just make them grade themselves, which usually works. Occasionally you have to raise questions about that, but but just tell me what grade you think you deserve for this, and it usually works.
Yeah, that I should maybe think about incorporating that.
Yeah. Sometimes actually the biggest problem with that is the students who think they deserve a C when you look at what they did and you think it's an A,
Right.
stuff like that. But
Yeah, those are some of the best students.
mm-hmm.
Great. Any other, well, maybe one last question. Does anyone else have a question or comment?
I've got one.
Bruce.
What does your group contract look like?
So I give them a format to follow, but they're responsible for coming up with specific like group, let's see, what do I call it? Group behaviors and expectations. So there's, as a group, they're supposed to talk and decide, right? Like, we're all going to check in with each other on Thursdays at this time, or, and I tell them to be as specific as possible. And then there's a section where I ask them to come up with a specific system of conflict resolution. And it's interesting because some groups decide, like, we're just going to do majority rules. And that's what everyone agrees to and signs on the contracts. Other groups come up with like a mediation process that they want to follow. And there's only been a couple of times where I've had to sort of remind them of their contracts, right? And so when there is a conflict, it's been nice in those cases to have them be able to go back to their contract and say, and remind each other, okay, this is what we agreed to. Can we work this out? I've only had one example of a group that just broke down. And that was not a fun situation, but we worked through it. So most of the time it's been success having them work in groups. So, and yeah, actually, I would love if any of you are experts in doing group work in your courses, I would love to get more ideas about how to make that work well. Yeah, history students tend to be lone wolves.
Well, sounds like you've done a great job with that. And thank you very much, Sarah. You're definitely innovative in what you've done there. And thanks for sharing with us and helping us see how we can improve our interaction with students and helping them make the class innovative by their work. So thank you. And thanks to everybody for attending today and for participating.
Thank you.
Give our clap and have a great rest of the day and a nice Eastern Conference weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good job.